Thriving Tribe, welcome back. Today we're going to talk about conditioning your mind and how we can condition our mind for a vision of ourself, a vision of our future, a vision of our potential, and how it really does matter the pictures that we hold in our head, and as well the pictures that we hold in our heart, or the emotions that we hold in our heart. A great book I recommend is called The Heart Math Solution, and it's really short. It's like 3 hours on Audible, so you can definitely bang it out in one day if you're really excited about it, right? But maybe a couple times of taking a walk or walking your dog, you'd be able to finish the book. And it talks a lot about the physiological changes that are associated with different sensations, right? Different emotions that you can put yourself in, whether you're in a state of love and peace or whether you're in a state of concern and outrage. They did a whole bunch of studies to look at what the heart rhythms are, and then how the heart rhythms that change based on the emotional states that you're thinking about on an ongoing basis, how that changes the physiology and the function of your whole body and brain. So, for example, cortisol went way up, as you would imagine, if you think of something that is stressing you out. And it's just the opposite, right? If you think about the people you love or the things that are beautiful about your life, your heart will also change, and your whole physiology will accommodate that as well. So that's that idea of an ongoing thought, right? And so I kind of dove into this part of it just talking to you, but what I had journaled about beforehand, and I wanted to write about with you, or to talk about with you, is that we can also hold a vision in our mind, right? So don't forget the heart part. That was kind of a freebie. It just came through, so here it is. But think about the mind, right? That's what I want to talk about today. Think about the mind. Think about what you think about for yourself and your potential. I'm always talking about how I really do believe that we are these incredible beings that have evolved over thousands and thousands of generations to be what we are, but over millions and billions of years to go from no life to life. And we are the byproduct of that. And that's an inheritance we share in, and that's a big part of who we are. So I'm always holding out that vision that I'm going to have tremendous health, not just today and tomorrow, but when I'm 100. And I mean it, right? And I think about it. And the thing that makes it possible for me to have that type of vision is that there are role models, there are examples. And so go out and find these folks who are older and doing things and living the way that you want to live when you're older. The first guy to really introduce me to this idea was Laird Hamilton. And I'm forgetting the name of his friend at this time. I think it's, Bob or something like that, just a rather common name. But Laird is this really cool dude, this big wave surfer, lives out in Hawaii, and he's done some incredible things with his life. And he's in his 50s now and continuing to be able to be super athletic and really doing exciting things. But he had this older friend who was in his 80s and would still go helicopter skiing, and would invite Laird and invite other people to get in helicopters and jump out of helicopters at the top of a mountain. And that's a badass 80-year-old. I don't know many 20-year-olds who go helicopter skiing. And that's the type of future that I'm excited about, that type of capacity, that type of function, that if you are able to maintain it across your lifetime, there's no reason you shouldn't have it at the end. And as a chiropractor, I study a whole bunch about health and also disease, right? Which is basically health gone wrong, right? It's that adaptation process we talked about, but gone down a negative direction. And today, one of the classes that I was learning about was all about how your spine can degenerate in all these different ways. And it's really interesting because it's a very scary thing to think about, right? Oftentimes when you learn about diagnosis, it's presented as like, oh my gosh, look what can happen. And it's definitely true. But I always try to maintain a level of, well, look what could be adapted towards in a positive direction, right? If you can adapt this way in a negative direction, why can't you adapt that way in a positive direction? Or why can't you maintain the health that you have so that you're never one of those people? Or like, what makes the difference between the people who have these degenerative conditions and the people who don't? Because not everybody does, right? That gentleman I was telling you about, 80 jumping out of helicopters, doesn't have the loss of function and then the loss of physical form, right? Whether it's the loss in bone density or the loss in muscle mass or the loss in cognitive capacity. He hasn't had those declines that we see in so many older people. But there's obviously some older people who definitely have had those declines. And to me, the interesting question is not why did those people break down, but why did other people not break down, right? What was it about their lifestyle that got them a unique outcome, an outcome that I want to have for myself? And I would suggest that maybe that's a line of thinking that you could have, right? Like, what made the difference for this other person over there to be healthy? And it got me thinking because the professor had a picture of an old man who was hunched over completely and using like a cane to walk, right? And we've all seen this type of person. And he was giving the example that, you know, when you walk around the supermarket, you're going to see elderly people who are hunched over and actually hanging onto their carriage as a form of support. And he was explaining about the neurology behind this and why this is taking pressure off the spinal cord and then relieving the pain symptoms down the legs and whatnot, right? So that was kind of like the clinical side. But the thought that I had that just got me was I looked at this picture of an old man, right? He looked like the old man in the movie Up, right? If you want to have an image, right? But I looked at this old guy and my heart opened up. My heart said, wait a minute. This was once a 12-year-old who could play baseball all summer long, right? Who could go running and swimming and jumping and moving, right? This guy who's now 80 and can't stand up straight at the grocery store because he has too much pain in his body. He wasn't always like that. Why wasn't he always like that, right? And then I started to think to myself, oh my gosh, right? I'm taking care of patients already, right? And will be continuing to take care of patients for decades to come. And some of those people, maybe you, who I'm talking to right now, are at a certain level of health. Maybe it's exactly where you want to be. Maybe it's not quite where you want to be. And I'm realizing, wait a minute, this gentleman who is now in a really tough position, right? There is still adaptation that man could have. And I don't want to diminish that. But the level of adaptation that an 80-year-old can have who's had 8 decades of maladaptation, it's limited, right? It's limited the amount of difference that man could make in his life. Is it worth trying to make it? Hell yeah. But what if this man 30 years ago when he was 50, or 40 or 50 years ago when he was 30 or 40, what if somebody had sat down with him and said, hey man, if you continue to do what you're doing, right? If you continue to live the way that you're living today and have been, if you continue to live, where will you be in a decade? Where will you be in 5 decades? Where will you be when you're 80 years old? If somebody had asked that man that question, maybe he might have started to realize, wait a minute, I could lose function. I could lose form. I could lose the ability to do and be with and connect with the people that I love to connect with because I won't be able to pick up my grandchildren anymore. I won't be able to go hiking with my friends the way I like to hike now that I'm 30 years old, right? If this guy had had that thought and then been taught some specific things he could do and have changed the way that he lived his life, would he be a different man at 80? Would he be the same guy in the picture that I was looking at? And that's why my heart cracked open, is that I realized this guy didn't have to get here. He's here, and we should work on that. But a lot of us watching this video are not there. But it's important to think about that you could be there. And I don't say that to scare you. I say that to wake you up, to shake you a little bit, that where are you right now? Where's your quality of health? Where's your level of health? It is as high as you would like it to be, or is it a little below it? Or is it way below it? Right? And ask yourself, when was a time that I had that health? Right? Like when I thought about this gentleman, and I said, wait, what about when this kid was a teenager in high school? I bet he could play all sorts of sports. I bet there no pain. I bet he woke up in the morning fine, good to go. Right? And I bet, as many of us do when we're young in high school, right? It's kind of like the joke, when you're young, you just bounce, you don't break. And, you know, of course, we still have plenty of that as we age, but people tend to maladapt, so they do less bouncing and more breaking, right? And it's like when this guy was in high school, like I said, he could play sports. I bet he could get tackled and no big deal, right? I bet he could tackle somebody and no big deal. Whereas if somebody tackled that 80-year-old man, it would be a tragedy, right? Like, he would go to the hospital. It would be a bad deal for that guy. And just think about that. Like, what type of person do you want to be in a decade, in 5 decades from now? And what type of person have you been? When was there a time in your life where you were really proud of the level of health you achieved or the level of physical capability you had, right? If you want to think of health in a slightly different way, like, what was your level of function that you were proud of, right? When did you play a sport? Or when did you dance all night at a wedding? Or when did you do something, go hiking with your family? When did you do something that you said, wow, that was awesome. My body was able to be the vehicle for me to have an experience that was really, really important to me, right? When was the time you had that health, you had that passion, you had that vibrancy, you had that functionality? And take some time, right? I really do encourage you, get yourself a journal and write down, spend a little bit of time after this activity and write down about what that felt like, what you looked like, what you are proud of at that time or grateful for at that time because of the level of health you had. And then do it for now. What's your level of health right now? Is it what you look back on and say, wow, that was also a great time, but you know what, now I'm just as functional? Or do you look back and say, wow, back in college or back in high school or back when I was 8 years old, right? You've got to be the one to pick when you really had that health that was good. But do you look back at it and say, wow, something has changed, something has been lost? And it's okay to feel some discomfort and some pain and maybe a little loss or a little hurt for not being where you want to be. Because that pain, let it be there, because that's what's going to make the difference in your future moving forward. And so the next step is just to project yourself a decade into the future. If you keep the habits and patterns and way of living that you have right now and have been having, if you keep that pattern up, where will you be in a decade? Right? For me, I'll be going on 40 in a decade, which I expect going on to 40. I want to be a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. I want to be a chiropractor that's serving hundreds of people a week, right? And that's a very physical thing to adjust people. And I want to be able to go hiking and running, and I want to play with my kids, and I want to be able to do all sorts of physical activities. I want to be able to build parts of my house or expand parts of my house or our property to make it more of what we want. Those are the things I want to be capable of with my body in a decade. Those are the things I want to be capable of in my body in 2 decades and 3 decades and 4 decades, right? I want to be the guy who's going helicopter skiing with his grandkids. I want to have that functionality. And so that's the vision that I hold for where I could be. And there's tons of role models of health that you could have at that level, right? I gave the example of some older folks who are present day contemporaries who have great health, but also look back. That's one of the things I love about the evolutionary approach to health. You can look at the skeletons of our ancestors going back hundreds and hundreds of generations, and you see people in their 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and these are people who were living like, as you would expect, cavemen, right? Going deep into their later decades of their life with great bone density, right? Very little sign of degeneration in the spine or in the knee joints or the shoulders or the hips or all the joints that tend to degenerate in modern people. And you can tell by it's called an enthesis. That's where a muscle attaches to a bone. These are points on bones that get stretched out because the muscle's always pulling on it. And depending on how big or small that bump is, if you will, on a bone, you can tell how powerful the muscle was that was attached to that bone. And when you look back at our ancestors, even outside of a couple hundred years ago, our ancestors had incredible bone density and incredible muscle strength. And when they look back at pre-agricultural Homo sapiens, they estimate that our muscle mass was 5 times greater, not in terms of bulk, but in terms of functional strength, 5 times stronger than it is today. And that was because they moved all the time. It wasn't like they were burning down CrossFit workouts 12 hours a day, because that was not how we evolved and that was not how we lived. But it was much more like they were walking around all day and occasionally sprinting, jumping, climbing, and picking up heavy things. But most of the time they were just simply moving. So the bottom line is we can have a very compelling vision of health in our future. We can also And you should take the time to look at people who do not have a compelling vision of health and are unfortunately embodying what you do not want to become. And think about these folks and let that be the carrot and the stick that drives you to make a different choice today and then to continuously make a different choice. That's called a habit. And a habit is what conditions you to be a totally different person or continuing to be that same great person that you are. So what I'm encouraging you today, guys, is to condition your mind with a vision of what you want to be and to hold that vision and to know that it's a possibility because you have role models of people who are already doing it or already have done it. So that breaks the mind trap of saying, well, because it hasn't been done, it can't be done. Because it has been done. So you don't have that as a challenge, right? Hold that as a vision of what you could be, of what you want to be, what people have already done, and then let that condition your brain so that every day you're taking action to be the healthiest possible person you can be. And then to tie it back to the heart piece, make sure that you fill your heart with gratitude and love. We're living through some very stressful times, and I certainly fall prey to getting stressed out and freaked out about what's going on in the world. So I'm not saying that I'm any better. In fact, I might be worse than most. But that's why I'm trying to tap more into my heart and trying to fill my time and my emotional and mental energy. I'm trying to pour that into this type of communication where I'm trying to help other people be as healthy as they can, where I pour it into myself to try to be as healthy as I can. And so yeah, sit with that. Condition yourself to be in a place of love in your heart and then with a compelling and beautiful vision of the future in your mind. My friends, I love and appreciate you. Continue to adapt and thrive.